Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of Press Corner, where we round up the most important headline of the week with our fellow journalists, columnists, experts, and we'll have a discussion going forward. Now, here on Press Corner, we celebrate the privilege of a free press by having a panel of diverse opinions, and we let you be the judge. Now, without further ado, let's introduce all of us together here. Małgorzata Zawadka, journalist, longtime U.S. correspondent for Polish media. And of course, we have Joe Harper, journalist, as well as, on my right, David McQuaid, a freelance journalist. Hello, guys, and welcome to TVP World.
Nice to be here.
So now we are looking at the first topic, which is President Zelenskyy's diplomatic offensive. And we know that the Ramstein meeting has unfortunately been postponed or canceled, depending on who you cite. And let's first take a look at the situation before diving into our next discussion. Let's take a look at a report.
Following the cancellation of the Ramstein summit, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy traveled across Europe to garner support for his victory plan. On Thursday, British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer welcomed President Zelenskyy and NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte to 10 Downing Street for discussions on military support for Ukraine.
We lose a lot of people, people dying, people getting seriously wounded, but still the Russians are making those small advances.
Following meetings with French President Macron and Italy's Prime Minister Meloni, Zelenskyy traveled to the Vatican, where he met with Pope Francis to seek assistance in negotiating the release of Ukrainian prisoners held by Russia.
We're preparing for meetings in Canada this month on the humanitarian aspect of the peace formula. I've invited the Vatican to participate.
As Volodymyr Zelenskyy visited Berlin, Germany's Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock criticized Putin's continued refusal to engage in dialogue with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz.
Putin is refusing this peace that we are all so desperately longing for. These days, he is no longer even ready to speak to the German Chancellor on the phone.
As these talks unfolded in Europe, Russian despot Vladimir Putin held a friendly inaugural meeting with Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian at a regional summit in Turkmenistan. The leaders expressed a very close alignment in their worldviews. The closer military ties between Iran and Russia, which have deepened since the Russian invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, have been raising concerns among Western leaders.
Now, of course, a lot of questions regarding the postponement of the Ramstein group meeting. And starting with Małgorzata, ladies first, do you think that this signals perhaps waning support for the West for Ukraine, or do you think this is just an isolated incident?
Well, it was postponed because of hurricane, right?
Yes.
So I think I would just I don't think there is any undercovered message in it. I just think that Joe Biden really did not. Maybe also it kind of helped President Zelenskyy to have this very friendly trip around Europe, because as we remember, when he was last time in United Nations, it was a very bad trip. Actually, he got really bad publicity from Donald Trump, and we heard this horrible speech of Donald Trump that actually puts blame on Ukraine and Biden and Kamala Harris for helping Zelenskyy for the war. So I think that from this point, this speech should be repeated everywhere, possibly, to remember what message Donald Trump put it out there, that it wasn't the fault of invaded, but of the invader to have the war. And what I really liked about this week was Ursula von der Leyen's speech in the European Parliament, when she said very strongly that we have to remember that even that I actually memorized it because I thought it was the exact counterpoint of what Donald Trump said, that we might speak different languages in Europe, but we will never mistake peace for surrender, and we cannot say that the war in Ukraine is the fault of people who were invaded. We cannot put the blame on victims, actually. So as going back to your point, I wouldn't think too much of it. Of course, Ukraine does not get what President Zelenskyy and politicians in Ukraine are asking, which is the permission to use missiles to strike targets in Russia, and it does not get the time if and how it will join NATO. However, the unwavering support uttered for, with every country that Zelenskyy goes to. No, I think everything is just waiting to, what will happen in American election. And I also think however, going back again, I've heard that the meeting will be in November. So it was postponed, but it will happen, I guess. But we still don't know who will be the president. So it's like...
Right, so it's still up in the air.
You cannot argue with weather, I would say, because the hurricanes in America, they were really horrible, so...
Right, so when it comes to this Ramstein group meeting that's supposed to take place, some of the most important point is Zelenskyy was planning on proposing his victory plan. Of course, he's going to ask for the permission to use long-range weapon to strike inside Russia, as well as kind of propose his road to NATO membership. Joe, do you think that this kind of postponement would actually drag things along and making it so that perhaps at least the victory plan is postponed?
One thing, I think some people in the States say you can influence the weather, right?
Yes, Marjorie Taylor Greene just said so. I'm sorry. I made a horrible mistake.
I don't know. I mean, I would imagine that all eyes are on what happens in the American election. Right? I mean, it's a question that I think David probably is more equipped to deal with. But I suspect, I mean, Trump is now talking about some kind of peace plan, isn't he? He talked about making within 3 days or something.
Right. That was also echoed by the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban as well.
Yeah. So I imagine that kind of all bets are off until, after November. In terms of what's happening on the ground, it seems to me, from what I understand, that there's a kind of there's a deadlock, basically, in eastern Ukraine. Right? I mean, the Donbass is somehow turning into the kind of First World War trench-like warfare. So a peace plan, it would depend on whether or not the peace plan was defined by what was happening on the ground, or it was defined in terms of more geopolitical considerations, right? Would Ukraine be prepared to relinquish a certain part of its territory? It's a question that's been going on for 10 years or so. Like Małgorzata said, I think we have to wait until November, and we'll see what happens in the States.
Right, very much so. I think a lot of the, uncertainty also comes from the vagueness of the so-called peace plan. A lot of people have been criticizing it being, not very transparent, even though we do understand the necessity to keep it vague. Russia is watching. Do you think that, the Zelenskyy peace plan is feasible given, the current situation on the ground?
It is feasible if he had the support. I mean, I think the decisive trip for Zelenskyy was the earlier one to the UN and to the US, because frankly, Europe is doing, and I agree von der Leyen's comments, and the comments we even got from Scholz were very constructive, and I think the European support for Ukraine is very strong right now. But the only country that can really move the needle on the war, especially in terms of supplying the military equipment Ukraine needs to gain an advantage on the battlefield, is the United States. They're the only ones that have the planes, the tanks, the long-range missiles in sufficient quantities to make a difference. And unfortunately, for all of the good the U.S. has done, the U.S. for years now has indicated by its actions that it is not ready to back a Ukrainian victory. They're willing to keep Ukraine on life support to prevent them from losing. And what we're seeing now on Donbass, I think, is actually, in some ways, it's a stalemate, a World War I type stalemate, but you're also seeing Ukraine steadily losing ground, and Russia apparently being able to accept casualties that maybe no other modern country would be willing to do. And so the question becomes, who cracks first? There's the hope, I think, again, this is why everything is depending right now. The whole peace plan, Zelenskyy peace plan, it seems to me to be realistic, but to a large extent, it's simply a PR exercise that's trying to influence what's going on in the States and to a lesser extent in Western Europe. But it really does all hinge, and I hate to be a broken record here, on the U.S. elections, because you've got you've essentially got three options here. You've got the Trump option, the peace option, which essentially is, as people have been able to understand it, it's threatening a cutoff of weapons to Ukraine unless they agree to some sort of peace deal, while at the same time making vague threats to Russia that if they refuse to negotiate peace, that the U.S. might step up military aid. That's one thing. The second thing is the Biden policy to date, and Europe's to date, which is to keep Ukraine from losing. And the third option that no one has tried yet is to try and dramatically boost military supplies to Ukraine with the idea that maybe they could win this thing. And frankly, the time for that is running out, because the lead time for a lot of these equipment, it's a year and a half, let's say, to train pilots. Does anyone really think Ukraine can sustain this war into 2026?
Well, it's a very difficult question indeed. And like you said, perhaps the time that Ukraine needs this increased military supply was yesterday. But of course, we do have to wait until the U.S. presidential election. And you just mentioned something, well, we're basically at this point seeing who cracks first. And unfortunately, we have heard some narratives coming out of even like Western European countries talking about territorial concessions. Some of these mentioned even by Chancellor Scholz himself. And with the narrative kind of shifting towards that, do you see a danger of perhaps the war fatigue kicking in and eventually having like an effect upstream?
I think the war fatigue has kicked in. I think Europe has, as it were, got over its war fatigue. The European war fatigue kicked in about 12 to 18 months ago, and they've gotten past that. But the issue now, I think the U.S. is the position there is, I think they're aiming for a Korean solution, which is that they realize that Ukraine is not going to agree voluntarily to territorial concessions. So what they're going to essentially try and do is create a ceasefire in place that could turn into a long-term ceasefire. The problem with that is whether Russia, seeing that it's got the edge on the battlefield, at least they believe that they do, whether they would accept that.
All right. So, yeah, we'll have to see what happens after the U.S. presidential election. And speaking of which, that will be our next topic going forward. We'll be exploring the U.S. presidential election as well as from the Eastern and Central European angle. But before that, let's take a look at a report to find out more.
Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán has expressed confidence that should his close ally Donald Trump be re-elected as US president, he will waste no time in addressing the ongoing war in Ukraine. He claimed that Trump would take immediate steps towards securing peace even prior to his inauguration.
What we will do, we will open several Battle of Champagnes if Trump is back. But what the others will do, that's another question.
Meanwhile, Donald Trump's campaign has ramped up security measures amid heightened threats. Following two attempted assassinations and a continued threat from Iran, Trump's team has requested military-grade protection. President Joe Biden stated that the request should be granted, underscoring the seriousness of the threats against his political rival.
As long as you don't ask for F-15s. Look, I've told the department to give him every single thing he needs for as he were sitting president.
The backdrop to these developments comes as parts of the United States continue to recover from a series of devastating storms. Donald Trump addressed Florida's residents amid the traumatic natural disaster.
You're going to be better than before, and just keep your chin up, and God bless you all, and God bless the great state of Florida. Your governor is doing an excellent job. Although the worst-case scenario was fortunately averted with this storm, it still caused destruction and damage in several areas in the state. Rescue efforts have brought much-needed results.
The state and local collaborations, over 1,600 individuals have been rescued, over 140 animals from floodwaters, rubble, or other hazards. So I want to thank everybody who is doing that.
Joe Biden has also commented on former US President Donald Trump, who has been accused of disseminating disinformation regarding the recovery efforts following Hurricanes Milton and Helene, which hit last month.
Mr. President Trump, former President Trump, get a life, man. Help these people.
As emergency responders work around the clock to rescue flood-stricken residents and clear blocked streets, millions remain without power due to a severely weakened grid.
All right, so a lot to get into, and of course, Małgorzata and Joe, you guys have made your position relatively clear, so I'll have to play the devil's advocate here. Małgorzata, so recently after Harris's kind of media blitz, we actually saw her support kind of waning and Trump actually gaining ground in a lot of these swing states. What do you make of it?
Well, I think that J.D. Vance, Tim Walz debate kind of also helped to normalize the ticket, Trump-Vance, because Vance became Donald Trump vice president, was very likable at the debate, good-looking, with Jesus-like gaze everywhere. And Tim Walz, I still think that if someone would listen to the debate on the radio, actually Tim Walz was making more sense than J.D. Vance. But J.D. Vance was really, he came across as someone dependable and strong. So I think it might have helped to lower the momentum of Kamala Harris. She did make a big mistake of not cutting herself out from a Biden policy, because two people and very friendly show hosts, because the first stop she made at The View, it's a table of female, really big supporters of her. And
she basically teed the question up for her to knock it out of the park.
She wanted to help her, one of the ladies, and she asked, what would you done differently if you were, if you could decide? And she said nothing. There is not a thing that I would do differently. And there is really such a problem with immigration that this was something that she should say, really, at least. So, and it showed her that she did not have much reflection on what was done wrong. So I think it was a big mistake. Of course, if someone really listens what she's saying, because the disinformation and misinformation is so huge that let's, for all supporters of Harris, let's hope that maybe it did not make such a difference. And there is one more thing that I think that we still don't know how huge impact it will have. It's Elon Musk joining Donald Trump
I was
campaign.
about to actually bring up whether or not that's going to be a coin toss.
Outrageous thing. I can like just leaving my house to join you here. Thank you so much for having me. I just watched a glimpse of Elon Musk sitting with Tucker Carlson, American journalist who is like a friend of Putin, and they were joking like, guys, Donald Trump has to win because otherwise I'm F. That's what Elon Musk was saying, which means that he's doing everything possible in his power for Donald Trump to win. And let's remember, he is the owner of the Starlink, the company that actually helps Ukrainians to win the war or to maintain the situation. He is the owner of the Twitter, X, formerly known as Twitter. So what is he doing? To me, it's like really we are in an incredible mess, and I will be surprised if Donald Trump will not win with this power of Elon Musk.
Right, let's get into the substantial stuff that you're talking about, because you mentioned that if Harris supporters hear beyond what's being portrayed in the media when it comes to more substantial stuff, they might be able to, continue their support for Kamala. Well, what are some of the strongest positions you think that she had when it comes to immigration and economy?
You ask what could she do?
No. What are her positions? Because you mentioned that there's a lot of disinformation.
Well, the thing is that from when Joe Biden signed an executive order curbing up immigration, the immigration is lower right now. For the last 3 months, the crossings are reduced, and Kamala Harris always says that it's not her administration problem. It's the problem of Donald Trump, who did not let the package. There was a big package in the Congress that actually was supposed to take care of the problem, and Donald Trump called the American congressmen and told them, do not support the bipartisan package of dealing with the immigration, so I could have something to run on. So of course, that's what always Kamala Harris says, that this is not her administration fault, but it's Donald Trump fault. However, of course, they did something really went wrong for the 3 years that this problem grew so large. Because I was in America for the whole month last month, and I actually have friends whom I talked to who are my age, my education, women, who would say they will vote for Trump because of the immigration, because they feel that Trump could have a better policy towards stopping the illegal immigration problem. So I think this is a big issue in America. Right. So she should address it more openly. She seems hypocritical. She seems that she's covering something. So, and this is one of the things also, when she went on this spree for talk shows, she's starting to get used to questions. And I would say her appearances are not so bad, but she did not have enough time. It's just 2 months comparing to 2 years of Donald Trump. So I'm still, as you said, my position is clear that I'm kind of rooting for Kamala Harris, but I'm kind of really saddened of how many mistakes Democrats made in this election. Right. I think this was really bad. And also her ability to be more honest, more open, more in tune with herself when she's giving the speeches. She seems kind of that she talks everyone almost the same, right? She gives the same sentences.
Yeah. You see, like the guests were able to kind of almost mimic whatever she's going to say even before she says it.
Exactly. You know, the thing is that she is a prosecutor, so she's not used to making stuff up. Whenever she says something, she has to be sure of it. That's what I've heard, right? But still, she should be more sure of herself. However, it's very hard to be in this position just in 2 months. Let's remember how much strain is put on her. So, and she does not want to risk anything, because with the race so close, everything could be risk.
Right. Now, David, when it comes to the Central Eastern European perspective here, what do you think Trump presidency might mean for American foreign policy? And if Harris becomes president, do you think that she will continue, like what you mentioned earlier, the life support of Ukraine instead of outright trying to help it achieve victory?
Well, to flip that around, I think that the only hope for a change in the direction of more military support for Ukraine is probably Kamala Harris winning, because there have been some indications that she stepped up the rhetoric. But of course, there's no guarantee that would happen. In fact, there seems to be a fairly strong consensus in the U.S. policy establishment that the main thing is to weaken Russia, but not have Russia fall apart. Which I think from a Central and East European perspective is a mistaken line, but it seems to be very strongly embedded in the U.S. policy establishment. On the question of Trump, we don't know. I mean, really, the thing I would underline with Trump is uncertainty.
Right.
I mean, it seems to be relatively clear that he's no friend of Ukraine, and that's for a number of reasons, which partly might have to do with, his alleged friendliness with Russian investors and with Putin in particular, and partly has to do with the past politics of his first presidency, where Ukraine ended up being a problem for him, a political problem for him, and from his perspective, Zelenskyy did not play ball. That he offered Zelenskyy a deal. I'll help you, you help me. Zelenskyy turned him down or pretended not to understand, and Trump doesn't forgive that sort of thing. On the other hand, to say that Trump would take an openly, the allegations that Trump is some sort of Russian agent of influence and Trump would take an openly pro-Putin line, well, that's possible, but not necessarily certain at all. And, there is a world in which maybe Trump, if he decides the Russians aren't playing a ball with him, could suddenly step up support for Ukraine. But I don't think it's likely. I think that the risks are asymmetrical, and certainly the way that the leaders in this part of the world, Eastern Europe, and in fact the EU in general, are approaching this election, you can see that they have a definite preference, and it's not Donald Trump.
Right. Well, Joe, when it comes to foreign policy, of course, for the Eastern European or Central European nations, a lot of talk is about whether or not Donald Trump will continue to support Ukraine. And it is a very big topic here. Do you think that will be able to kind of drive the needle, seeing that there's actually a very substantial number of Polish voters in swing states like Pennsylvania, which is projected to, well, be one of the determining states for this election going forward?
I don't know. I don't know if the Polish community in the States is something like 30 million. Is that right? Something like that. It's
800,000 Polish Americans, yeah.
In Pennsylvania.
In Pennsylvania.
In Pennsylvania, yeah. But they're spread. I mean, in Pennsylvania, I have no idea. Is that sufficient to make it, to push it over the line for Trump?
We fancy them ourselves that, yes, we could tip the scale.
We want to feel important, Joe. Don't
Joe, look at it this way. It's 6 or 7% of the electorate, and the polls in almost all of these states are within the margin of error, which means that essentially in many of these states, it's 5,000 or 10,000 votes could decide.
We're assuming that the Polish community in the States is going to be, what, pro-Trump, though, yeah? I mean, is that the...
They vote the same as general public, American public, so we don't know. But they are slightly pro-Trump. They did help Trump win in 2016.
Is that a consequence? I mean, are they aware that Trump will be less likely to support Ukraine? I mean, is that something that plays out in American politics? Because it seems to me that
they hope that
foreign
he's
policy
just
is a very
playing politics. Hope that he's just saying so, but
I think the Pennsylvania, for example, because Pennsylvania is the key to the entire electoral college. I think almost all the analysts think, and there are a lot of Polish Americans there. And the deal is this: yes, that from what we can tell, Polish-American voters are split more or less like the American public at large, but there's a question of a powerful single interest. For example, Cuban-American voters, it was always the attitude towards communism and the Castro.
Yes, but powerful...
They had different views, but they were always very anti-Castro, and that was a single issue that could sway them. In the case of the Polish-American voters, there's a hope that Ukraine might be that issue. My feeling is it doesn't operate as strongly with them as, let's say, Castro would with Cuban Americans.
Yeah, but Donald Trump is a friend of Poland, and he was underlying that he likes Polish people very much. He actually loves them. They are the best.
He says that about every group.
I know, but he would come here 3 times or 2 times, and every time we loved him. And also... I was watching, we had in October we have Pulaski Parade in New York. I don't know why Kamala Harris did not show. I mean, she should say something. She did. I didn't see that she did. And Donald Trump did speak to Polish people that, oh, I love you. You're so smart. You're the bestest. So
I would think in terms of the American election, looking from a distance, though, I mean, talking about Kamala Harris's strategy, I mean, it seems to me that what she's doing is allowing the Republicans to kind of fall apart, right? I mean, that's the strategy. Whether it's working or I don't know. But J.D. Vance and J.D. Vance seems like an electoral liability, from what I see. Trump plays his game. We know who he is. The people know who he is. He's kind of avuncular. He's a bit unpredictable. But J.D. Vance is quite ideologically more coherent, shall we say? And
let me push back on that a little bit, because after like Małgorzata mentioned, after the Vance and Walz debate, we actually see a surge in popularity of the Trump ticket, with the Walz and Harris ticket kind of dropping. So how did these connect? Can you elaborate how you think J.D. Vance is actually
I can't explain that. I mean, I would have thought. I mean, American politics is probably being, before the election, is probably being driven to a large extent by the migrant issue, as Małgorzata said. So it's kind of playing into the culture wars strategy that the Republicans have been deploying for the last, 10 years or so, So that may be playing out. It's a very simple message. There's a migrant crisis, and somehow we need to deal with that, and that kind of feeds into other narratives about the demographic changes that are taking place in America, kind of long term. Will it continue to be a majority white population, etc. So there are certain sensibilities, I think, within the core kind of Republican constituency that are, there's a kind of message that's being told to them to shore up that part of the electorate. But it doesn't seem... I mean, in terms of that particular debate, I thought that Waltz came out very well. I mean, that was my feeling. I don't think J.D. Vance came out particularly well. He's saying things which I think are quite extreme, but trying to put them into a kind of more moderate... trying to package them in a more moderate way. And I personally, I didn't think that worked. I was quite surprised. I mean, I thought Kamala Harris's approach or her team's strategy was quite clever to allow those gaps between Trump and Vance to become more explicit. Obviously, it's not. But although, from what I saw the other day, there was a 3-point lead for Kamala.
Well, if I could put in something here, my reading of the poll. My reading of the polls is a little bit different, which is that there hasn't, as far as I can tell, there has not been a surge for Trump-Vance. What has happened is that the Harris-Waltz ticket picked up major ground the first 4 to 6 weeks, and the last 2 to 3 weeks they appear to have plateaued.
Yeah, right.
In other words, there's no more. There are no more gains. It's basically neck and neck, and to me, that's predictable, which is I think they picked up a lot of the votes that they were capable of picking up. But most of the 95% of American voters have probably already made their position. So now the question is going to be, it's really a question of who picks up the marginal gains. I mean, it's going to be too close to call.
And also the turnout rates, right? Like who can drive out
mobilizing those who would normally sit at the couch and not go for the election. So this is like very important to pull those people and vote.
But there was a poll, I think, 2 or 3 days ago, right, that gave Harris 3% lead.
Yeah, but Democrats have to.
That doesn't tell us what happens in the swing states.
They had to lead in the polls in order to win.
Yeah, because Trump usually overperforms the polls by several percentage.
People tend not to admit that they will vote for
Trump. It's not about the nationwide national.
True.
The popular vote is also. I'll say right now will be won by the Democrats, but that doesn't. That's not going to affect the election. It's going to be the swing states.
Right.
I still think that very much underline what will be very much important in this election is our American public unrealized biases, because they might say one thing, that we will vote for Kamala Harris, which is probably more politically correct in America, and at the end they might do something else. And we will see what will be in the news at the last, because still the Republicans who were searching for anything on Kamala Harris might keep
Even
it.
third-party candidates, how many people vote for Jill Stein could swing the election?
Yes, which she's actually, I really like her. She's a
so
doctor,
definitely still a lot of variables going up in the air. And like Małgorzata just mentioned here, immigration is becoming an increasingly important issue, and not just in the United States, in Europe as well. So we'll be discussing that issue going forward. What's the immigration policy going to be like in Poland, as well as the Schengen area? Let's take a look at a report first to find out more.
Recent developments in Europe regarding irregular migration have sparked serious concerns about the future of the Schengen area, the passport-free zone that has long symbolized European integration. With 420 million people relying on Schengen for seamless travel and trade, the introduction of border checks by some member states raises the question: is Schengen on the brink of collapse? This concern might have seemed a radical one a decade ago. However, the decision by Germany to reintroduce border controls, particularly along its borders with Poland, highlights the growing tensions within the zone. Polish Deputy Interior Minister Maciej Duszczyk voiced Poland's opposition to the move, emphasizing that such measures could undermine the principles of the Schengen Agreement. The future of the Schengen area became a focal point of debate during the European Parliament session in Strasbourg on Monday. European lawmakers and the European Commission discussed the implications of reintroducing internal border checks and their potential long-term impact on the region's stability and cohesion.
Niemieckich granic w przeddzień wprowadzenia kontroli.
The current German government does not want to strengthen the external borders, but is strengthening the internal borders. But this is only one manifestation of a much broader phenomenon. The principle of what is good for Germany is good for Europe has long since ceased to apply. I warn against national egoism. No country is strong enough anymore to cope with the challenges of an entire continent. In the European Parliament, we are increasingly asking ourselves, who stole Germany from Europe?
Europie Niemcy.
Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk said on Saturday that Poland would not respect or implement any asylum right if it threatens Poland's security.
I am going to be absolutely tough and ruthless when it comes to illegal migration. We will be respecting only those European migration laws which support our security.
This decision reflects the broader trend of individual countries opting for go-it-alone solutions in the face of migration pressures. While the Schengen area was constructed through political will, its sustainability may now be tested by the same forces that once built it.
All right, so let me give you a little bit of a hard time here, Małgorzata, because in our previous segment, you mentioned that the immigration issue is something in the States that has been a talking point, a narrative for the Republican Party vying for their electorate. But we're also observing the same issue being brought up over this side of the aisle. Can you help us understand whether or not this is also more of a rhetorical thing, or is it an issue that really actually needs to be addressed?
You mean what Donald Tusk said yesterday? Because I was stunned hearing it. I was absolutely shocked. And then I watched commentaries, and what was even worse that was said, that afterwards journalists would ask people in his government, and I don't remember the gentleman, but someone would ask, so what about people in Poland who already wait for asylum? Yeah. They already applied for asylum. And the answer was, well, they should go home, which is like, you don't apply for asylum if you can go home, right? So and then because we are, what Donald Tusk said, that we are holding our asylum policy. There will be no asylum, and the commentary of Donald Tusk supporters was that he was just saying that. They was just saying that to scare Lukashenko, not to try to send immigrants through Polish borders. But to me, if whatever Germany did was, you know, letting the genie out of the bottle, that we could not be, we don't have this solidarity policy if it comes to immigrants. This is like really something really hard, because it's not only against, you know, temporary borders. It's against human rights, because being the right to asylum it's human right. So I'm really surprised. The commentaries of Donald Tusk supporters is that he was just saying so he's just being Donald Trump on NATO, I would say, because that's what Trump supporters says, that he's just saying so to make sure that NATO will pay its share. So here he's just saying so for, you know, political reasons. But I would like more to hear about this. We will probably have this discussion in Poland, in our Polish media, starting from Monday. Right. But I've heard that former Vice President of Human Rights Office, the lady said that I forgot her name. I'm sorry. No. It wasn't Miss Ochojska. It was some other lady who said that this Donald Tusk was saying that this is an immigration policy, this is an anti-immigration policy. So this was like pretty stunning to me. So that's I was surprised to hear it.
David, so like Małgorzata mentioned, perhaps Germany's action also let the genie out of the bottle when it comes to closing off its borders or implementing at least border checks. Do you think that this kind of whole Schengen zone free movement policy is going to be threatened now that more and more countries are implementing their own forms of limitation when it comes to immigration?
Well, I think Donald Tusk thinks so. I think a lot of people do. I mean, this is one thing you're getting is shaping up as a major dispute within the EU between Poland and Germany, but there may be a lot of countries that would be willing to side with Poland on this particular issue. That's one thing. But the second thing is that I think this was no accident that Tusk said this, and it's highly deliberate. And I think it's, in some ways, Małgorzata, your comments on why didn't Kamala Harris distinguish her own policy? Well, you're getting your recommended course happening here right now, which is that I think Tusk is convinced that immigration and the impact of immigration on politics in Europe poses an existential threat, that it could lead to the victory of far-right parties.
Yes.
And he's determined not to allow that. And that means that, I mean, he said this a number of times, he believes that the border must be under control. There must be physical sealing off of the border, and people have to feel safe. And now we see how radical he's ready to be. I think what he's decided is that Russia and Belarus have weaponized EU asylum policy, and that the pact, and that he needs to make a spectacular gesture to say this is not going to work, and it's aimed both east, as you know, for example, Lewandowski said, one of his party colleagues, but it's also aimed obviously at Brussels and at Berlin. And I'll be very interested to see how this plays out. I mean, he's making a bold, aggressive move, but this is a guy who has been president of the European Council. He has a very good idea how this is going to be received in Europe, and I think this is deliberate.
I'm just hoping that this is not a bold, aggressive move, just to make sure that the arguments against him being a German spy or whatever by the populist party in Poland, whom he won over a year ago, but it's playing with their cards. And I see that it's like with abortion. Abortion is a human right. Asking for asylum, if you are from another country, if you are a country who will terrorize you and kill you, being able. So he's playing with secret notions.
Yeah, but Tusk's response to that, he said, yes, but the basic human right is the right to live. And if we can, by adopting a hard-line policy, discourage this procedure of force of Belarusian secret services using these people, then maybe it'll end up saving lives.
Let's hope so. I'm not, but I still would.
Right.
I have to think about it.
We got a little bit of time left. Let Joe get a word in. Do you think that this will go well within the EU, or is it going to cause a wider rift? I mean, what would Ursula von der Leyen think about it?
I think it's a pattern that you see within a lot of countries in Europe and also the UK. It's a similar pattern that you see in the States, right? I mean, it's the centre kind of flirting with the some of the rhetoric of the far right. We're strong, we're tough, the border is important, and so on. I think that the thing that I think Małgorzata was talking about was that there's a difference between asylum policy and migration policy, right? If you're already here. What happens? I think Tusk is concerned about sending a message to Belarus, right, and to Russia that this border is not to be played with, because obviously Lukashenko has played, but I think the issue of asylum says something about the European Union's attitude towards foreigners, right, to outsiders. How do you? He talked about, I think yesterday, integration, and Tusk has talked about European civilization, and sometimes the rhetoric and the practice, the policies on the border, that there is a kind of a gap, I think, between them. It's quite a brutal system that exists, procedure that exists on the border at the moment. Yeah, pushbacks became kind of de facto policy on the Belarusian border, and that's quite brutal. What he's talking about in terms of suspending asylum procedures inside Poland or inside the European Union, I think was what he proposed yesterday. I don't know what that means in practice. That I think is quite dangerous, because it's a suspension of the Geneva Convention on Human Rights and so on. Anybody that comes into your territory has a right to be processed, to be heard, their claims to be processed. And if you're pushing people back, you, by definition, don't give them the right to apply for asylum. Right. And if he wants to make that a European-wide policy, I think that's quite dangerous. In terms of the politics of it, in terms of the optics, it kind of makes sense, right? I mean, that's the way, that's the direction. It's the idea that somehow you can neutralise the far right by adopting some of their language. Right. But it may be that it emboldens the far right, right? I mean, that's the game, and we don't know how it's going to play out.
Yeah, indeed. We don't know how it's going to play out. And like Małgorzata mentioned as well, we'll have to wait and see how the situation develops and how that's going to be implemented. In the meantime, that concludes our time here on Press Corner. Guys, thank you guys so much for being with us here. And thank you for watching this edition of Press Corner here on TVP World. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned.